what is power is very difficult for me to say precisely, but power is the Pan-African Workers Association, and this is an initiative that developed off WhatsApp in reaction to the growing number of people who are migrating to the UK as care workers. I think our aim is to um, make sure that people join trade unions first, and then to encourage as many people as possible to become part of the working class movement. This is really built on the premise that we don't think that, to be a conscious worker is something that just arises spontaneously. Workers need to be educated, workers need to understand the class struggle and all the other bits. And I think we think of ourselves as fulfilling that gap. So, I mean, it's premised along the lines of the sort of the Indian Workers Association, but it linked in a slightly different way. We don't think that currently there are any barriers to joining trade unions, but we think that if you join a trade union, you are not really taught the class struggle, but you're just kind of being asked to pay your subscriptions in return for a service, and we're trying to overturn that. So the initiative started when my cousin visited, joined the UK, not visited, when she came to the UK sometime in summer of 21, 22, thereabout. And we were in Cornwall just talking about her experience because she had recently arrived from Zimbabwe, and she was just telling me about the fact that she wakes up at 5 a.m. and then goes back home at midnight. And I said, wow, you must be making a lot of money because of all of these hours that you're pushing. And then that's when she told me, no, I'm not getting paid for all that time. I only get paid for the time that I spend within a service user's house. I said, what? So all the time that you're not in contact with service users, what happens? She says, no, that's not calculated as pay. So I think for most of the family members I was with, they actually supported and said, oh, well, if you're not, in contact with someone, then you don't deserve to be paid. And I said to her, look, this doesn't sound right to me. Have you ever considered? And I just started doing some little bit of research. And in fact, I didn't know much about the visa, including trying to find out whether there was this new visa. And in trying to do all of that research, it turned out that this was a much bigger problem than just my cousin ranting and expressing a frustration that she wasn't getting paid for the time that she was at work. So I contacted a few people, whom I thought would be interested in kind of whether they knew, like mostly trade unionists from Zimbabwe, whether they were aware of, firstly, the rapid increasing number of people who were coming to the UK, as well as the challenges that they were facing. And then that just sort of opened a can of worms, and everyone said it was a big challenge, and then created a WhatsApp group and circulated it on social media, asked some other influential people, at least on social media, to distribute the group. And, it started growing organically. And we just started preaching that people must join trade unions because we didn't have any capacity for casework or to deal with individual cases. So that's how Power started. I think it's an important, as far as I can see, it's actually the most crucial element to how the care industry has been, let's say, reconstructed since, I would argue, Boris Johnson came into power in 2019, thereabout. Just before that election in which he was contesting against Jeremy Corbyn, the issue of social care was a top priority for voters in the UK, and both parties, Tory and Labour, were kind of jostling and putting forward policies to deal with what they call the care crisis, I think. Now, but how they solved this crisis is just really they reverted back to their old colonies and said, well, let's go and get labor from the colonies, because I think they might have calculated and realized that it wouldn't be possible to fix this problem using, local labor and local resources. Now, if I tell you my experience in Power, right? So Zimbabwe, it was under sanctions, both US sanctions and EU sanctions, since 2002. And, because of all the troubles that it faced in the post-colonial era, there are no jobs, high levels of unemployment, and sanctions exacerbated those problems and naturally drove people to start migrating, firstly to South Africa. And then when South Africa started facing its own challenges, Zimbabweans migrated from South Africa to the UK. So I think, Lenin had talked about this in his treatise, I think, Magnum Opus, Imperialism, the stage of capitalism, where he talks about the initial pattern during imperialism is for people to move from the imperialist countries to the sort of developing countries or underdeveloped countries. But then that reverses during the imperial epoch, because now you can see that people are actually coming from Africa and all the other places, India, to come and work in the care sector at rock bottom wages. Why? Because those countries have been dominated. There's no industrial base in those countries. There are no jobs. And quite rightly, people would have to react to that and decide to go. And often the places that they can go are the imperial centers where like the former colonial masters. Without that arrangement, Britain would struggle to get any workers to fulfill its care roles. The same is applying in fishing, though. Even you see that in fishing, people from the former colonies coming to work in the fishing sector at rock bottom wages and poor working conditions as well. And this pretty much works well for them because then they create a visa that has got so many restrictions, doesn't allow you to organize, doesn't allow you to, to fight back. And then it also divides the working class because you can always dangle and say, oh, there's so many immigrants and, so this is a very useful tool. And without that, I think without labor coming from the global south, the care sector wouldn't function for a day. In fact, even the NHS. So I think this is how we should be looking at the problem that, imperial conquest involves the decimation of these countries. And once they've been decimated, there are no industrial jobs. Then people are forced to migrate. And once they migrate, there's a visa that's already waiting for them to absorb them and doesn't allow them to have any rights. And without those rights, then you can then provide your care services at, super cheap prices. So I think imperialism is key, and we should be looking at the problems in the care sector from using that lens, as well as the challenges that arise from that in terms of organizing workers, as well as the broader impact on the working class movement in the UK.
And
This makes organizing terribly, terribly difficult. And you need to believe me because I've been trying to do it for the past, say, 5 years. First of all, the visa situation almost shuts down the door, shuts all the avenues for organizing. Because anyone who tries to raise their head, they'll be thinking, okay, I borrowed money to come to the UK for the flights, for all the costs that are associated with this visa. And they basically cannot think about losing their job, right? So if the employer asks you to do anything, then you will do that because you are worried that if you losing your job becomes a matter of literal life or death. And the second bit is that there's just it creates a suspicion because it's connected to migration, right? Local workers sometimes resent to migrant workers because they think that these people are often the picture that's presented of the migrant is not someone who's actually coming to do job work, but someone who's coming to load on benefits and to just suck the welfare state dry. So that means that opportunities for solidarity and collaboration are limited or at least stifled by the visa situation. And I think the third aspect as well is that it is also inbuilt mechanisms because they create incentives, right? Everyone who's coming on the visa is often promised that after 5 years you'll be out of the visa situation and then everything is going to fall in place. You will become an indefinite, you will have indefinite leave to remain, and then eventually become a British citizen, which would give you all the benefits that you can think of. So for that reason, people are saying, okay, it's better to keep my head down and then think about organizing after 5 years. So whenever you talk to people about organizing, they think, oh, no. You want to damage their prospect. You want to kind of hamper their prospects of getting their indefinite leave to remain. So this is a challenge. And I think there's also kind of suspicion as well for people who are coming, in the imperial center. They've always had a picture of what they thought Britain was supposed to be. And for you to tell them that the situation is a little bit difficult or different, it's almost as if you're coming up with stories or you're lying. And people think that you're trying to encourage them to do something that is dangerous, And I don't blame anyone for that because obviously if your visa is taken away from you, the consequences might be dire. And there's also, debt that you would have accumulated either, but also because some people, who are now employing, who are like elements of some sort of petty bourgeois, but lower elements of the petty bourgeois, or fellow, say Zimbabweans who have started these small businesses as care agencies. They are also kind of exploiting their own relatives, because usually people are coming through connections, right? You get a connection that either your relative can facilitate a certificate of sponsorship for you, or someone that you know from church. Now, for you to then tell this person that, look, this relationship is exploitative, you need to be careful, you need to be on the lookout. It's also very difficult. And I've heard people sometimes they say, oh, I'm being exploited, but can you just approach my employer without me knowing? Just do it anonymously, right? So, and that's often difficult. How do you organize anonymously? How do you, the tools that we have today involve picketing or going to do a demonstration. This is not something that you can do anonymously. So it also dents the confidence of workers to organize themselves. But I think this is also an opportunity for us to think of creative tools and creative ways of fighting back against this exploitative system, which is useful. I think no one would argue that these people are not doing an important job. It's just difficult to find the right level of societal consensus, or at least societal support, to make sure that the rights of these people are respected.